Picture the most powerful family the world has ever known. Now give every one of them the same face, the same heavy jutting jaw, the same thick lower lip that never quite closes over the teeth, the same long chin, generation after generation, painted by the greatest artist in Europe, who were paid fortunes to make it look noble and still couldn't hide it. Add a king who cannot chew his own food, add a queen who is her husband's niece, add a dynasty that owns Spain, Austria, Hungary, half of Italy, and an empire in the Americas where the sun never sets and cannot produce one healthy child. That's the House of Habsburg, masters of the world, prisoners of their own blood, a family that conquered everything except the inside of its own body. We're going back there tonight, not as historians reading family trees, we're living it. One day, one long strange day, inside the Royal Alcázar of Madrid, in the year 1698, in the shadow of the last Habsburg king of Spain, everything you would have seen, smelled, heard, and been forbidden to say out loud. So I make these history stories, and honestly I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just lying in the dark wanting to hear about a king whose jaw didn't fit his own skull. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. The first thing you learn at the Spanish court is this. You are not allowed to touch the king. Nobody is. Not his hand, not his sleeve, not the hem of his coat. There is a story every servant in the Alcázar knows, and they tell it to you on your first day, quietly, the way you'd warn someone about a loose stare. Years ago, a king of Spain was riding when his horse reared and threw him. A soldier ran forward, caught the king's body before it hit the stones and saved his life. Then the soldier left the country, immediately, because the punishment for laying hands on the sacred person of the King of Spain, even to save him, was death. You think about that story a lot, because your entire job is touching the king, your eyes open to darkness. For half a second you've forgotten where you are, and your body still thinks it's in Segovia, in your father's house, where the morning smelled of wool and wet stone. Then it hits you. The smell. It's not one smell. It's layers. Tallow smoke from the candle you let burn too long last night. Greasy and animal. Cold ash from the brazier in the corner, dead since midnight. The sour bite of vinegar from the basin where the instruments soak. Your master insists on vinegar, though nobody knows if it does anything. Somewhere below, the reek of the palace stables working up through 3 floors of stone, horse dung and straw and ammonia. And under all of it, the smell of yourself, sweat dried into wool, hair that hasn't been washed since the feast of San Isidro, the particular staleness of a body that sleeps in the same shirt it works in. Welcome to the Royal Alcázar of Madrid, autumn 1698. You're lying on a straw pallet in a room the size of a confessional, tucked under the roofline of the palace's north wing, above the apothecary's stores, off a corridor so narrow 2 men cannot pass without one turning sideways. Your name is Miguel de Robles. You're 16 years old, and you arrived here 2 years ago from Segovia, with a letter of recommendation, a leather roll of your dead father's razors, and the ability to keep your mouth shut, which, it turns out, is the most valuable skill in this entire building. Back home, everyone said Madrid would make your fortune. They weren't wrong. They just didn't say what it would cost to watch. You're the second assistant to Don Cristobal de Mesa, barber-surgeon in the service of His Catholic Majesty Carlos II, King of Spain. the man half of Europe calls, behind gloved hands, el hechizado, the bewitched. And this morning, before the sun is properly up, you're going to shave him. The bells start before you're fully dressed. Madrid has more than 70 churches and monasteries inside its walls, and none of them agree on the exact minute of dawn. San Ginés is closest. Its bell cracked slightly on one edge so that every third stroke lands flat, like a man singing with a cold. Then the Descalzas Reales joins in, then the Encarnacion, then a dozen more you can't name, until the whole city is one argument made of bronze. You've heard people say the bells of Madrid ring for the living in the morning and the dead in the afternoon. This year, it feels like the afternoon bells start earlier every week. The floor is cold under your bare feet. October cold, the dry Castilian kind that gets into the stone and stays there until May. There's a saying about the air of Madrid. It won't blow out a candle, but it will kill a man. 9 months of winter, 3 months of hell. You believe both halves now. Your roommate, a kitchen boy named Tomas, 13, from some village in Extremadura whose name changes every time he tells it, is still asleep, curled like a dog against the wall you share. Yes, you share the pallet. That's normal. Privacy is for people with surnames that appear in books. At least Tomas doesn't talk in his sleep anymore. He did his first months. He used to call for his mother. You never mentioned it, and neither did he. You break the skin of ice on the water basin with your knuckles. Actual ice, the first of the season, and splash your face. The cold hits like a slap, and you're grateful for it, because the next 4 hours will require your hands to be perfectly steady, and nothing steadies the hands like being fully, brutally awake. Then you dress, and every piece of clothing is a statement about exactly what you are. A shirt of rough linen washed grey, black wool breeches because everything at this court is black. It has been black for 150 years, since the old emperor's time, black as a mark of gravity, of piety, of Spanish seriousness, so that the richest court in the world dresses like a funeral that never ends. Darned stockings, shoes with wooden heels worn down on the outside edge, because you walk the same corridors in the same direction every single day. And over it all, the plain dark jacket with the narrow white collar, the galilla, that stiff cardboard and linen ring around your throat that only Spain still wears, that the French laugh at, that makes every man in this palace look like his head is being served on a plate. The galilla marks you as belonging to the king's household, below a gentleman, above a groom. You're allowed to walk through certain doors and required to be invisible in every room behind them. Appearances matter in this palace. They matter more than food. You have watched noblemen ruin themselves, as to genuinely ruin themselves, sell land their families held for 3 centuries to keep the right number of servants in the right livery, because at this court to look poor is worse than to be poor. You collect the leather roll of razors, the copper basin, the towels, the pot of soap scented with orange water, and you step out into the corridor, into the dark intestines of the Alcázar. And here's what you have to understand about this building. The Royal Alcázar of Madrid is not beautiful. From the outside, from the west, coming up from the Manzanares River, it looks like what it is. A Moorish fortress that has been swallowed, floor by floor, by 700 years of additions. Square towers with slate spires, those are new, barely 80 years old, built to make the place look less like a prison. Behind them, walls of brick and rubble, courtyards inside courtyards. More than 1,000 rooms, and no two of them on quite the same level, so the walking across the palace means going up 3 steps here, down 2 there, ducking under a lintel cut for men who died before Columbus sailed. There are corridors that end in walls. There are staircases that servants use and staircases that would cost you your position if you set foot on them. There are rooms so deep in the building that no window has ever reached them, lit by lamps that have burned, someone told you without interruption, for longer than anyone can remember. And everywhere, the paintings. This is the thing that broke your mind a little, your first weeks. You'd come from Segovia, where a painted altarpiece was a wonder people walked a day to see, and then you carried towels down the Alcázar's southern gallery and passed, without stopping, more masterpieces than exist in most kingdoms. Titians the old kings bought by the crate-load, Rubens, wall after wall of Rubens, flesh and horses and storms, and in the rooms near the king's own apartments, the works of a man who held your exact position's ancestor, Velázquez, who began as a painter and died a palace official, and whose great canvas of the little princess and her dwarfs and her maids hangs where the king can see it. The princess in that painting, Margarita in her silver dress. She was real. She married her uncle, the emperor, at 15. She was dead at 21, worn out by pregnancies, 4 children, 1 survived. You didn't know any of that when you first saw the painting. You just thought, what a beautiful child. Now you know the family better. Now, when you pass the portraits in the dark, and the corridors are always dark, the candles always too few, the black-dressed courtiers moving through the gloom like carp in a pond. Now you see what a stranger sees only after someone points it out. The faces are all the same face, not similar, the same. You can walk 100 years of portraits in 40 steps. Emperor Charles, master of 2 worlds, painted by Titian in armour, the jaw already heavy, the lower lip already thick, the mouth already open, because it would not fully close. His son Philip II, who ruled from a desk and built a palace shaped like a gridiron, the same jaw, a little longer. Philip III, longer. Philip IV, the current king's father, painted by Velázquez with all the mercy genius could manage. The chin now a promontory, the lip now a shelf, the whole lower face pushed forward as if the skull behind it was slowly, across generations, being squeezed by an invisible hand. They call it the Habsburg jaw. In Vienna they call it the Habsburg lip. In the medical books your master keeps locked in his chest, it has a Latin name, prognathism, which you can read but are not supposed to. And here is the thing nobody at this court will say above a whisper, the thing that took you a year of listening at doors to fully assemble. The face is not a coincidence. The face is a ledger. It is the visible sum of a family arithmetic that has been running for 200 years. Uncle marries niece, cousin marries cousin, and the crowns stay in the family, and the lands stay in the family, and the blood stays in the family, and the blood remembers. The old joke, even you have heard the old joke, is a Latin verse. Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. It sounds clever. It sounds bloodless. Wars kill soldiers. Weddings kill no one. You have seen where the weddings ended up. He's waiting for you at the end of this corridor, behind 6 doors and 40 years of ceremony. By morning you'll have had your hands inside the proof. Don Cristobal is already in the antechamber when you arrive, laying out his own instruments on a cloth of dark green velvet. He's a dry, narrow man of 60, with a face like a folded document and hands. This is the first thing anyone notices. Hands as soft and precise as a lace maker's. Those hands have bled dukes. Those hands have pulled teeth from the mouths of men who could have you erased from the world with a signature. Those hands once famously lanced an abscess on a grandee of Spain in complete silence, because the grandee considered it beneath his dignity to acknowledge that anything was happening to his body at all. He has taught you perhaps half of what he knows: how to strop a razor until it will split a hanging hair, how to read a fever in the smell of a man's sweat, which of the palace physicians are learned and which are dangerous, and above all, the great rule of court medicine, which he made you repeat until you said it in your sleep. The rule is this: at court, the body of the king is not a body. It is a legal fact. It is a sacrament. It is the property of God, the dynasty, and the council of state, in roughly that order, and the actual meat and bone of it, the thing that aches and swells and fails, comes last, after everyone with a title has been consulted. "You're late," he says, without looking up. "You are not late." He says this every morning. You've learned that it is not an accusation. It is a ritual, like the bells. It means begin. You begin. You check the water. It must be warm, never hot, because His Majesty's skin marks if you breathe on it wrong. You unroll the razors. You fold the towels into thirds, then in half, the way the etiquette requires, because at this court there is a required way to fold a towel, and there is an official whose ancestors were granted the hereditary right to hand it to the next official, and God help the man who collapses that chain. And this is the moment, every morning, when you feel the building change around you. The Alcázar wakes in a particular order, dictated by a book of ceremonies written 150 years ago and never seriously revised. Somewhere below, the guard is changing. You hear the butts of halberds knock stone, the Walloon sergeant's voice. Somewhere the ladies of the Queen's household are being unlocked. Their wing is literally locked at night, and there are men whose whole office is the keys. The kitchens have been alive for hours, but their smoke is not allowed to drift toward the royal apartments, so it climbs the far side of the palace, and on cold mornings you can watch it lean away from the king's windows as if it too had read the etiquette. Then the doors, 6 sets of doors between the outer gallery and the room where the king sleeps, and each one has its officer, and each officer has his moment. You and Don Cristobal pass through them the way a thread passes through cloth, expected, counted, invisible. The gentleman of the chamber at the last door looks at your master, looks at the velvet roll, looks at you the way a man looks at a chair being carried, and nods. And then you're inside, and there he is, Carlos II, by the grace of God, King of Castile, of Leon, of Aragon, of the Two Sicilies, of Jerusalem, of Navarre, of Granada, of the Indies, of the islands and mainland of the ocean sea. The titles go on for half a page. You've seen them written. The pen has more stamina than the man, is sitting in a chair by the shuttered window in a dressing gown of black silk, being spoken to in a low voice by his confessor. He is 36 years old. You would not guess it. Strangers who see him guess 50, 60, or nothing at all, because strangers who see him mostly stop guessing and start praying. He is small and bent. His legs, you know his legs, you have bandaged them, are swollen soft with fluid, so that his stockings leave deep ridged prints in the flesh, like fingers pressed into dough. His skin has a greyish, waxy cast, always slightly damp. His eyes are large, dark and strange, mostly dull, but capable, a few times a day, of a sudden, complete, childlike attention that is somehow worse than the dullness, because it reminds you there is a person in there at the bottom of the well looking up. And the jaw, the famous jaw, the family jaw, the jaw from all the portraits, except the portraits were flattery. In the flesh, the lower jaw projects so far beyond the upper that the two rows of teeth cannot meet. At all. Anywhere. He cannot bite through a piece of bread. He cannot chew. Everything he eats must come as soup, as paste, as minced and pounded slurry. And even then he swallows it in whole gulps, because the machinery of his mouth was assembled from two different plans. His tongue is too large for the space it lives in, so his speech comes out thick and wet and hard to follow, and he did not speak at all until he was 4. He did not walk until he was 8. The women of the court carried him on cushions like a relic, because they were afraid, genuinely on doctor's advice, that the weight of his own body would bend his bones. His lower lip hangs, his chin is long and pale. When he is tired, which is always, his mouth stays open, and you can hear his breathing from across the room, a soft, labouring, bubbling sound, like a pot at the very edge of simmering. This is the master of the largest empire on earth. Silver from Potosi, galleons from Manila, Naples and Milan and Flanders and Mexico and Peru. All of it flows on paper to the hand of the man in this chair, and the hand trembles too much, most days, to sign his own name without a secretary steadying the paper. The confessor withdraws. The king's eyes find your master, then the basin, then you. And then he does the thing that, 2 years in, still undoes you a little every morning. He smiles, crooked, effortful, the great jaw dragging the mouth sideways, but a real smile, because the shave is one of the few hours of his day that belongs to his body instead of his office, and because Don Cristobal's hands do not hurt him, and because you figured this out slowly, nobody talks at him during the shave. For 1 hour, nobody wants anything from Carlos II except that he sits still. He is the most powerful man in the world, and the high point of his morning is being allowed to close his eyes. You bring the warm water, you tie the cloth at his throat, your fingers a careful half-inch from his skin, until the moment they must not be. This is the exemption, the little heresy at the heart of your job. The barber's hands are legally not hands, they are instruments. The law of the untouchable royal body looks away for 1 hour a day so that the King of Spain does not grow a beard like a hermit. Don Cristobal lathers. The smell of orange water rises, briefly winning against the room's deeper smells of wax, incense, and sickness. The razor catches the candlelight, and your entire task for the next hour is to hold the King of Spain's jaw steady in your 2 hands. You know its weight now. That's the thing you could never explain to anyone back in Segovia, the thing you will never be allowed to say aloud in this building. You know the actual weight of the Habsburg jaw. It is heavy. It pulls. You cup it through the linen, one hand under the long chin, one steadying the cheek, and you can feel the misalignment as a physical fact under your fingers, the joint riding wrong in its socket clicking faintly when he swallows, the muscles along it knotted from 36 years of compensating. His skin is loose and cool. His pulse taps against your palm, fast and shallow, a bird's pulse in an empire's body. 200 years of weddings, and this is where they ended, in your hands before dawn, trembling slightly, smelling of orange water. The razor whispers. The king's eyes close. Somewhere below, all 70 churches of Madrid are ringing for a new day, and the man they are all in the end ringing for breathes wetly through his open mouth and is, for this 1 hour, at peace. You were nobody in Segovia. You are still nobody. But no duke in Spain, no cardinal, no ambassador of France knows what you know. Exactly how the end of the world's greatest dynasty feels against the palm of your hand. Hold steady. That's the whole job. Hold steady and never ever say what you see. Since we are living this day properly, come to the public dinner. 'Cause nothing, not the portraits, not the crypt, nothing taught you what this family is faster than watching its last member eat. It happens at midday in one of the great chambers of the king's apartments, and it is open, in the old Burgundian style, to those with the right of entry. Grandees, gentlemen, distinguished foreigners brought by the ambassadors to see the King of Spain with their own eyes, which is precisely why the council hates the custom and cannot abolish it, because abolishing it would confirm what seeing it reports. The table is set for one, always for one. No queen, no minister, no guest. The King of Spain eats alone before witnesses, like a rite, because he's not a man having lunch. He's the crown demonstrating its continued existence. The plate is gold. The napkin arrives on a salver carried by one officer, is taken by a second, presented by a third. There is a gentleman whose hereditary honour is the cup, another the carving, another the tasting. Every dish tasted first against poison, which even the tasters know is a formality aimed at the wrong century, since the thing consuming the king was served at weddings decades before his birth, and the food comes in, dish after dish after dish, a procession of it, partridge and ham and river fish and pastries borne high past the watching court, and nearly all of it is scenery. It exists to be presented, bowed over, and removed. What the king can actually eat arrives quietly among the pageantry. The broths, the creams, the flesh already pounded in the kitchens to a paste that will not require what his mouth does not have. The whole gorgeous parade exists so that the 2 or 3 humble bowls at its heart pass without emphasis. The kitchen serves an empire's banquet in order to hide an invalid's tray inside it. Even his food wears court dress. He eats. The room stands. This is the part you had to learn to bear. 40, 50 people, ranged in order of precedence, in total silence, broken only by the officers' movements and the small sounds of the table, and every eye in the room is on the king's mouth. They pretend otherwise. Pretending otherwise is the entire skill of a courtier. But you have stood at the service door with a ewer and watched the watchers, and their eyes return and return to the working of that jaw, the way tongues return to a broken tooth. The spoon rises. The head tips back. He must tip his head, always, to move food past teeth that cannot meet, so that the King of Spain dines facing slightly heavenward, as if in perpetual mild astonishment. The swallow labours down the thin throat, audible in the silence, click and gulp. The room hears it. The ambassador's guests hear it. Tonight it will be described at supper tables in Madrid, next month in Paris and Vienna and London, in dispatches, in memoirs for 300 years. I saw the King of Spain eat. He cannot chew. It is all true, and he knows. That is the thing your 2 years have taught you that the memoirs will miss. Watch his eyes down the table. He knows exactly what the room is doing, has known since childhood, has never once eaten a meal in his adult life that was not also a document read aloud to Europe, and he comes anyway every day the fever permits, and lifts the spoon with a hand that shudders, and performs his own exhibition with a patience that you have run out of other words for and have started privately in the attic of your own head where no etiquette reaches, calling courage. Afterward, sometimes, if the day is good, comes the hour you like best in this whole building. The king withdraws to the small rooms, the private ones, low-ceilinged, warm, where the etiquette thins out and only body servants follow, and he goes to his clocks. He loves clocks. It is the one appetite the jaw cannot tax. The inner chamber holds a dozen and more. German table clocks in gilt towers, a Flemish piece where a silver cock spreads its wings at the hour, English work with painted moons. They chime against each other, never quite agreed, a little argument of bells in miniature, Madrid's 70 churches shrunk to a tabletop. And the King of Spain will stand at that table for an hour, winding them with his own trembling hands, refusing help, because winding is a thing his hands can still do if given time, and he gives them time. You have stood at the wall holding towels no one needed, watching the master of both worlds coax a key into a small brass mouth, breathing his labouring breath, absolutely absorbed at peace. And you have thought, of course it is clocks, a mechanism that is wound and runs and strikes its hours and winds down and is wound again. A body that any pair of patient hands can heal completely, once a day, forever. He owns the only patients in the palace who always recover. He is their physician, and his rounds never fail, and nobody watches his mouth while he makes them. This silver cock spreads its wings. 2 o'clock, says the little Flemish court. 10 past, insists Augsburg. The English moon abstains. The king almost smiles, the crooked drag, and sets about reconciling his kingdom of springs. And once, and you've told no one, and you're telling only the dark. He held a small clock out toward you where you stood with the towels, held it out flat on both palms, the way you'd show a bird's egg, not giving it, showing it, wanting, out of that walled-in life, 60 seconds of the thing everyone else in the world has, someone to show a thing to. You were not permitted to approach unbidden. You were bidden, the gesture bade you. You crossed and bent over his hands and looked at the little machine going about its shining business, and said, because it was true, and because your entire vocabulary of court phrases deserted you, "It's very fine, Majesty." "Augsburg," the king said, thick and slow, with the pride of a man producing his one certified fact. And then he took it back and returned to his winding, and you returned to your wall, and the whole exchange had lasted less time than a credo. And it sits in you to this day heavier than the crypt, because the crypt was history, and this was just a person, briefly out of the deep, showing a boy his clock. They will call him El Hechizado forever, the bewitched. Fine, but you knew the witchcraft from 6 inches, daily, for years, and you will state for the record what it actually was. A cradle full of grandparents who were also each other's uncles and nieces, 4 instead of 8, the arithmetic of a folded sheet, and inside the ruin that arithmetic built, all the way to the end, winding his clocks, thanking his barber, touching his dead wife's marble. Someone. There was always someone in there. That is the horror, and that is the mercy. And they are the same fact, and you carry it, and now, gently, because the night is getting on, so do you. The shave ends the way it always ends, with the towel, warm from the brazier, laid over the king's face for a slow count of 20, and then the official whose office it is to receive the towel receiving the towel. The king murmurs something thick and kind that you have learned to decode. It is thanks, and Don Cristobal bows to precisely the depth his rank permits, and you bow lower, and you both walk backward out of the room, because no one turns his back on the King of Spain, and you have become very good at walking backward through doorways while carrying a basin of grey water, and not existing. In the antechamber, while you pack the roll, your master examines the razor edge against the light and speaks without moving his lips, a court skill he has and you are still learning. The swelling is worse. You say nothing. Agreeing out loud with the statement about the king's body, even in an empty room, is a habit that ends careers. But he's right. You felt it under your fingers. The flesh along the jaw and throat is tighter this week. The ankles above the royal slippers were shining, and the smell, under the orange water, under the incense. The smell was a half tone off. Sweetish. Your master taught you that smell on other patients, in the poor wards of the Hospital General where he makes you work on your free days so you'll learn on bodies that aren't sacred. It's the smell of a body that has stopped keeping up with itself. He asked me a question during the bleeding on Tuesday, Don Cristobal says, still to the razor. He asked whether it was true that his father was already old when he was born. A pause. You keep folding towels. I told him His late Majesty was 56. He counted it on his fingers. The razor turns in the light. On his fingers, Miguel. And then he said, and my mother was his sister's daughter. And then he stopped talking, and I finished the bleeding. And we have never had that conversation, do you understand me? We have never had that conversation, you repeat. Good. Take the linens down, then the apothecary, then you're mine again at the hour of the dispatch. And you're released into the palace, into the long morning, carrying a basket of the King of Spain's used linens through corridors of black-dressed men. And here is where you actually learn things, because a boy with a basket is a piece of furniture, and courtiers will say anything in front of furniture. By the second staircase you have learned that the French ambassador requested an audience again, and was again given a date 3 weeks away, because the council does not want the ambassador's report on the king's appearance reaching Versailles before certain letters do. By the linen room you've learned that the Queen quarrelled with the Camerera mayor over a German maid who was dismissed, that the Queen wept, and that the Queen eats almost nothing at the public dinners, which everyone watches, because everyone at this court watches the royal table the way sailors watch the sky. And in the corridor behind the chapel you pass 2 gentlemen you know by sight, one attached to the Council of Castile, one to the Austrian party, standing in a window embrasure, and you slow your furniture walk to its slowest, because they are saying the word that the whole palace is built around not saying. Succession. The king has no children. 2 wives. The first one French, Maria Luisa, who they say was the only person who ever made him laugh, dead at 26 after a decade of pressure to produce an heir, dead so conveniently for some interest that half of Madrid still says poison. And now Mariana of Neuburg, German, formidable, chosen from a family famous for fertility, the way you'd choose a mare from a line of good foals, 10 years married, nothing. The Queen has announced pregnancies, announced them, had them prayed for, had them celebrated, that dissolved into nothing, because a phantom pregnancy at this court is not a private grief, it is an instrument of policy. As long as an heir might be coming, the Queen's party holds power. So the 2 greatest families of Europe circle the bed of a dying man like relatives at a will reading. The French say the empire must go to a grandson of Louis XIV, whose mother and grandmother were both Spanish infantas, both Habsburg, because the French married into this family too. Nobody's hands are clean. The Austrians say it must go to the emperor's line, cousins to the 10th degree and proud of it. There is even a compromise candidate, a small boy in Bavaria, great-nephew to the king, and the king likes the idea of the boy, and everyone knows that whichever way the sick man's pen finally moves, Europe probably burns anyway. All of that. The ambassadors, the councils, the army's already doing arithmetic. All of it balances on the body you held this morning, on a jaw that cannot chew, on a bloodline that spent 2 centuries folding in on itself like a sheet of paper, folded too many times until it simply would not fold again. The gentlemen see you. They stop talking. One of them looks at your basket, at your golilla, at your face, deciding whether you are anything. You are not anything. You bow and continue. Behind you, after exactly the right number of your footsteps, the voices resume. That is the microscopic humiliation of your entire life here, and you have made peace with it, mostly. You are a pair of steady hands with legs. You carry the most dangerous knowledge in Europe through these corridors twice a day, and you rank below the man who keeps the keys to the candle stores. At the public dinners you have watched the king eat, alone, at a table set for one because etiquette does not permit anyone to share the king's table. Watched him struggle a spoon of pounded chicken past that jaw, while 40 courtiers stood in silence, and watched him swallow, because watching the king eat is an honour, and honours are compulsory. Nobody may sit, nobody may speak. The only sounds are the carver's knife and the king's labouring throat, click and gulp, in a room hung with Titians. The richest court on earth, and dinner sounds like a sick room. You eat standing up afterward in the passage behind the buffet. Bread, hard cheese, whatever the table officers hand down, and you are, and you know it, luckier than 9/10 of Madrid, where the bread is cut with rye that ruins men's legs, and the poor boil the same bone 3 days running. The last basket delivered, you have half an hour of your own, and you spend it the way you always spend it, and don't fully understand why. You go to the gallery and stand in front of the portraits. There's a run of them along the east wall, hung chronologically, which is either an accident or the most honest thing in the palace. You start at the far end, with the founder, not the first Habsburg, but the first of this game, old Emperor Maximilian, who worked out that a wedding conquers more cheaply than a war, and married his son to Spain and his grandchildren to everyone, and set the machine running. His portrait jaw is strong but ordinary, a man's jaw. 10 steps. Charles, his grandson, inheritor of 4 dynasties at once, because all the deaths broke his way. The jaw now unmistakable, the lip now the family lip. Ambassadors of his own day wrote home that the emperor's mouth hung open, and strangers thought him slow until he spoke. He was not slow. He ruled half the earth and abdicated exhausted and retired to a monastery in Extremadura, where, the monks still tell this, he rehearsed his own funeral while alive, lay down and listened to the masses sung for his soul. Even the strongest of them, you think, was already practising being dead. 10 more steps, and here is where the paper folds again. His son Philip married, among others, his own niece. Their son married his niece. You count on your fingers sometimes, like the king. Of the last 7 royal marriages in this line, 5 were uncle and niece or first cousins. The king's father, Philip IV, was his mother's uncle, which makes the old queen mother the king's mother and his first cousin at once, and makes his grandmother also his aunt, and makes his family tree. You've seen a friar sketch it once secretly with dots and lines. Not a tree at all. A tree branches. This thing closes. It loops back on itself like a net, like a knot, like the plumbing of the palace, and at the bottom of every loop the same face gets heavier. The friar who drew it said something you've never shaken. He said, "In an ordinary man, 8 great-grandparents, His Majesty has," and he counted, and crossed out, and counted, and arrived at something absurd, some number like 5 and 1 ancestress, Mad Queen Juana, locked away for love and grief 2 centuries ago, appearing in the king's ancestry over and over, more than a dozen separate times, like a ghost that found every door. Nobody in this palace has the science to name what that does. There is no word yet for what is happening in the king's blood. The word is 200 years away. The court has only 2 explanations on offer, and you hear them both daily. The pious say, God is punishing Spain, or testing her. The frightened say, witchcraft. Someone bewitched the king, in his food, in his childhood, in a cup of chocolate. And that explanation is winning, because it has one great advantage over God's justice. A bewitchment can be undone. You stand in front of the last portrait, the king, painted a few years ago in armour he could not carry, the jaw softened by a paid brush, and still filling the bottom third of the canvas. And behind you a voice says quietly, "They say the painter cried." You turn. It's Thomas, the kitchen boy, hugging a sack of charcoal, staring up at the picture with black smudged cheeks. Cried? When he finished it. That's what they say in the kitchens. He shifts the sack. Is it true you touch him, the king, with your hands? The corridor is empty. The portraits watch with their one shared face. Get the charcoal downstairs, you say, before someone touches you. He grins and goes. You look at the painted jaw one more second. The jaw you held an hour ago, warm and trembling and real. And then the palace bell strikes, and your half hour is over, and you go to find your master, because today is not going to be an ordinary day. Today, the German is coming. Today they are going to try to pull the devil out of the King of Spain. Before the German, before the crypt, you should see what your free days look like, because your master's rule about them explains everything he is. 2 mornings a month, Don Cristobal releases you from the palace and requires, it is a condition of your training, that you spend them at the Hospital General down the Calle de Atocha, working under the surgeons there for nothing. The palace will teach you ceremony, he said, your first week. The hospital will teach you bodies. A man who knows only one of the two is dangerous in both places. So you know the other Madrid. The Hospital General is a world of its own. Hundreds of beds, sometimes 2 to a bed. The wards long and vaulted like the naves of poor churches, and the smell. You thought the palace had taught you smells. The palace taught you nothing. The smell hits you at the door like a wall. Suppuration, vinegar, lye, tallow, the sweetness of gangrene, the ammonia of the incontinent, and threaded through it all, incense from the ward altars, because in Spain even the dying poor are dying inside the church, and the work. At the palace you fold towels in thirds. At the hospital, on a single free morning, you have held a mule driver's arm while the surgeon took 2 fingers off it, with shears and hot iron, the man biting a leather strap and staring at the ceiling with the concentration of a saint. You have picked lice from the head of a dying beggar woman, because she wept about them, and it was the only thing anyone could fix. You've carried out what needed carrying out. Your hands cracked at the knuckles that first winter, from the lye water, and stayed cracked till spring. Your master inspected the cracks and nodded, satisfied, as if they were coursework. Here is what the hospital taught you that matters for this story. The poor of Madrid are broken in 100 ways, as by carts, by fevers, by hunger, by each other. But their children, when the children live, come out new, straight-limbed, wild, various. A porter's son looks like his mother, or his grandfather, or nobody at all. The blood of the poor is a river with 100 tributaries. Galician servants marry Andalusian carters. A Fleming from the Guard marries a baker's widow, and the stream keeps moving, keeps mixing, keeps clean. The blood of the family on the hill is a pond with the inlet sealed, and you've stood in both places in the same week, held a beggar's newborn, alive and furious and perfect, at a tosha on Tuesday, and held the king's jaw at dawn on Thursday. And no physician, no theologian, no minister in Europe has stood where you stand or knows what your two hands know. The lesson costs a real. The lecture is free. Nobody with power will ever attend it. The palace has its own broken bodies on display, of course, displayed on purpose, which took you months to understand. The court keeps dwarfs. It has kept them for 200 years. Velasquez painted them beside the princes, and not as mockery. Look at those portraits someday. Really look. The dwarfs are painted with more humanity than the ministers. They hold offices, they draw salaries. They are permitted. This is the thing. They are permitted to speak. There is one still at court in your time, an old man now. Nicolacillo they called him, when he was painted as a boy with his foot on a sleeping mastiff, in the same canvas as the little princess. He is past 60, pensioned, small and bent-legged and completely unafraid, and he talks to you sometimes in the Winter Gallery because you are furniture and he is licensed, and between furniture and the licensed, conversation is possible. You hold his head, he said to you once, without preamble, watching the snow through the window. Not a question. Everyone below stairs knows what everyone does. I steady it, you said carefully. I used to make his father laugh, the old man said. That was my office. There were 8 of us, 10 of us. The Planet King, they called him. And he sat in this cold pond of a court like a carp, and we were the only creatures allowed to splash. He rubbed his crooked knee. You know why they kept us, boy, the great ones. You think it was cruelty. It was the opposite. We were the only bodies at court more wrong than theirs. Beside me the jaw was nothing. Beside me the king was Apollo. He smiled up at you. An old man's smile, 3 teeth and all of them ironic. Every family buys a mirror it can bear to look in. We were the mirror. Good wages, mirror work, and I'll tell you what I saw in 40 years of it. He waited until a page had passed out of earshot. The snow ticked at the glass. I saw them love each other, he said. That's the joke nobody laughs at. Uncle and niece. I stood in the room, boy. I saw the old king weep for love of that girl, his own sister's child, God's truth. Nobody forced them the way you'd force a mule. The contracts came first, but the love came. It always came. They were raised to it. Cousins sent each other portraits like lovers because they were both. They loved their children. Christ, how they loved them. I watched the Planet King bury 12. 12, boy. He wrote letters to a nun for 20 years asking why God kept taking them, and it never once, not in 40 years. The old man tapped his own temple. It never entered any of their heads that the taking and the loving came from the same place, that the thing killing the children was the wedding ring. You cannot see the pond when you are the carp. He gathered his little cloak and stumped off toward the braziers, and at the end of the gallery he turned and gave you the rest. The way the old give away their heaviest things to the young casually, so as not to frighten them. Steady his head well, boy. It's the last one. When it stops, the mirror trade stops with it, and honest men like you and me will have to find work among people who look like everybody. That could be you thought, watching him go. 60 years in this building, licensed to say true things because no one has to listen to a jester. And then you thought, no, it couldn't. He is the only free man at this court, and the price of the freedom was being born into a body the court could use. Everyone here pays for the door they came in through, even the king, especially the king. You should explain the exorcisms, because if you don't, none of the rest of this day makes sense. It began, the way most disasters at this court begin, with good intentions and a letter. The king's confessor, a Dominican, sincerely convinced you believe that no natural illness could do to a man what has been done to Carlos, wrote to a fellow friar in Austria who had a reputation for interrogating demons. The friar put the question to a possessed woman in his charge, as one consults an unusual archive, and word came back across Europe in careful Latin that yes, the King of Spain was bewitched, had been bewitched at the age of 14 in a cup of chocolate wherein was dissolved. You've heard this repeated so many times in whispers that the words have worn smooth like coins. The brains of a dead man to take his understanding, the entrails of a dead man to take his health, the kidneys of a dead man to take his seed. Stop and sit with that a moment, the way you had to when you first heard it. The most powerful government on earth, the Empire of the Silver Fleets, officially entertained the theory that its king was ruined by corpse parts in his cocoa. Inquiries were opened. The king's own confessor and the Inquisitor General ended up destroying each other over it. One dismissed, one dragged before the tribunal he used to run. Ladies of the bedchamber were questioned. The Queen was, not quite openly, implicated by people who hated her. Carriers detonated in every direction. And through all of it, the small bent man at the centre submitted. That's the word for it. He is the most obedient patient you have ever seen. He drinks what he is given. He wears what relics they lay on him. He has had the preserved body of San Isidro brought to his sick room and slept beside it. Has had the Virgin's images carried in procession through streets gone quiet with dread. Because here is the thing you have come to understand. Holding his jaw every morning. The king believes it too. Of course he does. He has been told since childhood that his body is a battlefield between God and the devil. And what is the alternative? The alternative is the corridor of portraits. The alternative is that no one did this to him, that it was done before he was born, by 100 years of contracts and dowries and dispensations, by everyone and no one, by love of family carried to its perfect airless conclusion. A demon can be cast out, an ancestry cannot. So when they tell him a new exorcist has come, a German with letters from Vienna, the king does not resist. He never resists. He asks only, your master heard him ask it, and told you in 2 words and then pretended he hadn't. He asks whether it will hurt. The German arrives at the hour of the siesta, when the palace pretends to sleep and actually sharpens its ears. You see him cross the courtyard from the upper window of the apothecary's stores, where you're supposedly counting jars. A tall friar, dust-coloured habit, a walk like a man who has never once doubted himself, 2 Spanish Dominicans trailing him like tugboats. The courtyard's black-dressed idlers track him without turning their heads, a skill this building teaches everyone eventually. Your master is summoned an hour later, and because his instruments are summoned with him, you are summoned too, into the small oratory off the king's bedchamber, gold and gloom, wax and cold stone, where you press your back against the wall beside the door and become furniture with a pulse. They have seated the king in a great chair before the altar. He is in black, the golden fleece on its red ribbon at his throat, and he is gripping the chair's arms the way you grip the rail of a boat. On the altar, candles, a crucifix old enough to have gone on crusade, a stole, a book, holy water in a silver vessel. The queen is not present. The confessor is present. 2 physicians are present, standing with a particular stiffness of learned men, obliged to watch someone else practice on their patient. And it begins, and you will not repeat most of it, because most of it is Latin in a voice built for bigger rooms, and prayers you know, bent to a use you don't. But there are 3 moments you will keep until you die. The first, the German asks the king his name, as if it might be contested, and the king answers, thickly, labouring, the jaw dragging every syllable, Carlos. And then, in the pause, with the reflex of 40 years of documents, he begins to add the rest. Carlos, by the grace of God, King of Castile, of Leon, of Aragon. And the friar holds up one hand, and the King of Spain stops, mid-title, obedient as a schoolboy, and something in your chest turns over. The second, the friar lays the stole across the king's shoulders and commands, in that filled cathedral voice, in the name of everything holy, commands the enemy to declare himself. And the room holds its breath, all of it, the physicians, the confessor, the gold saints in their niches, you. And the only sound, and you will hear it for the rest of your life, is the king's own breathing, that soft, wet, bubbling labour, in, out, in. The sound you know better than anyone in this room, because you listen to it from 6 inches away every morning. The sound the friar has decided is his adversary. There is no demon in that chair. There is a tired man with a jaw assembled from 2 mismatched inheritances, breathing the only way his body knows how. You know this the way you know the weight in your own hands, and you can never say it, not to your master, not in confession, not in your sleep, because the official truth of this empire is currently being negotiated 6 feet in front of you, in Latin, by a man shouting at a symptom. The third moment. Near the end, the German bends close and asks the king, softly now, almost gently, and somehow the gentleness is the worst thing you've ever heard, whether he feels the evil leaving him. And Carlos II, el hechizado, master of Spain in the Indies, looks up with those dark, strange eyes gone suddenly, terribly attentive, and says, thick and slow and perfectly clear, I feel very tired. That's all. I feel very tired. The friar straightens and calls it progress. The physician's right. The confessor weeps a little, from relief or its opposite, and you stand against the wall holding a velvet roll of razors nobody needed, learning the final lesson of the Spanish court, the one Don Cristobal never put into words because it can't be said out loud. They are not trying to cure him. They gave that up years ago, whether they know it or not. They're trying to find someone to blame, a witch, a demon, a queen, a cup of chocolate, because the real cause hangs in 40 portraits along the East Gallery, wearing the family face, and no one can arrest a wedding that happened 100 years before the patient was born. The king is escorted out to rest. Passing the door, passing you, he stops. He actually stops, and the whole room's blood stops with him, because he has recognized you, the mourning boy, the hands, and he says something. The jaw mangles it. The room leans in. The words come out in that wet, effortful voice, and later the courtiers will claim he spoke of angels. and the kitchens will claim he prophesied, and the ambassador of the emperor will report to Vienna that the king's spirits were much restored. You were 18 inches away. What the King of Spain said to you the furniture was, tomorrow, the shave, the warm cloth first, the warm cloth first. His whole empire on fire at the edges, half of Europe writing his obituary in draft, a German shouting at his breathing. And the thing he wanted, the thing he used his own voice to secure, was the 1 hour of his day that doesn't hurt. Yes, Majesty, you say, before anyone can decide whether you're allowed to. And for 1/2 second, under the ruined jaw, the crooked smile, then the doors and the ceremony and the black river of the court closes over him again. That night, after the exorcism, you cannot sleep, and neither, it turns out, can the palace. You lie on the pallet listening to Tomas breathe and to the building not sleeping around you. Footsteps where footsteps shouldn't be at this hour. A door somewhere closing 3 times. The dry cough of the sentry in the courtyard below turning over on itself in the cold. Around 2, you give up, wrap your blanket over your shoulders, and go to sit in the window bay at the end of your corridor, the one with the cracked shutter, where a boy can be alone with the city. Madrid at night, from the Alcázar's north wing, almost no lights. A capital of the world, and after midnight it is a dark plain of roofs, with a lantern here and there where a watchman walks or a sick man is being sat with, and the sky above it enormous and hard with stars, because Madrid's air, whatever else is wrong with it, is mountain air, and the stars come down close. Somewhere out there, in that darkness, 150,000 people are asleep with tomorrow's bread already worrying them, and every single one of them knows the king was exorcised today. The kitchens knew by supper, the city knew by dark. By Sunday, Vienna and Versailles will know in cipher with commentary, and sitting there, you find yourself thinking. You don't choose to. The thought arrives like a cat about the first queen, Maria Luisa, the French one. You never saw her. She died when you were a child in Segovia. But this palace has never stopped talking about her, and the older servants get a particular voice when they do, lower and warmer, the voice people use for the one good chapter. She was 17 when they married her to him, a niece of the French king raised at Versailles among fountains and violins, and they say she wept when she was told, wept for days, begged, and her uncle the King of France is supposed to have said something cold and perfect, that he was making her Queen of Spain, and what more could he do for his own daughter? And she's supposed to have answered, you could make her Queen of France. True or not, all Madrid knows the exchange by heart. Even the water sellers can do the voices. And then she came, 17, to this black-clad court with its locked wings and its etiquette, like a slow avalanche, a girl who had grown up dancing, and she was watched every hour by duennas with faces like vinegar, forbidden to look out certain windows, forbidden to laugh at certain volumes, and the whole of Europe leaning in on her body from week 1. Is she with child? Is she with child? Is she with child? Here is the part the old servants always reach, the part they polish. He loved her. Carlos, genuinely, helplessly from the first audience, this broken, gentle, terrified man, 20 years old and never once chosen by anybody for himself, and suddenly there is a person in his rooms who is young and alive and his. They say he followed her with his eyes the way dogs follow the one who feeds them. They say she was kind to him, not performing kind. She taught him card games. She got him occasionally to laugh. There are servants still in this building who heard it, and will tell you about it as if describing a miracle, which at this court it was. The sound of Carlos II laughing, wet and cracked and real, somewhere down a corridor at something his wife said, 10 years, no child, the pressure closing on her year by year like water at depth, pamphlets in the streets, prayers ordered from the pulpits for her fertility, her own French attendants sent away one by one, the court's kindness curdling into blame, because a barren queen at this court is not an unlucky woman, she is a failed policy. They dosed her, they pilgrimaged her, they laid relics on her belly, and in her 10th February, 26 years old, she took sick after riding, a bad stomach, then worse, 2 days of agony, and died, and half of Madrid said poison before her body was cold, and some said the Austrians did it to open the bed for a German bride, and some said other things, and no one will ever know. And the man she left behind, the man she left behind is the man you shave. And the older servants say he was never the same, and you believe it, because you have seen the state portrait of her that hangs where he passes daily, and you have seen him pause at it, not often, not dramatically, a half-step's hitch, going by, the way a man's hand finds an old scar through his shirt without his knowing. They married him again within the year, of course. The bed of Spain cannot stand empty. The etiquette absorbed his grief in a fortnight and produced a German. That is what this family is, in the end. You understand it clearly for the first time, sitting in the cold window over the dark city on the night of the exorcism, a machine for continuing itself that has forgotten every other purpose, so perfectly built that it goes on running even now, even with nothing left to continue, grinding through its ceremonies around one exhausted man the way a mill turns after the grain is gone, wearing its own stones to sand. Down in the courtyard the guard changes, the knock of halberds, the countersign, boots on stone. Somewhere below your feet, 6 doors deep, the king sleeps or doesn't, freshly certified as progressing, his demons formally addressed, his fever politely waiting for Thursday. You go back to your pallet at last, and before sleep takes you, you find you are doing the thing the whole city does, the thing you'd have sworn you were too knowing for. Lips moving in the dark, a boy from Segovia, praying, not for the succession, not for Spain, you leave the big words to the councils. Praying, with embarrassing sincerity, the leech woman's granddaughter's prayer, the water seller's prayer, the whole poor honest prayer of Madrid, for the king. That tonight at least nothing hurts. That evening, Don Cristobal sends you out of the palace and you're glad to go, because after the oratory you need Madrid the way a diver needs air. Even Madrid, especially Madrid, the loudest, dirtiest, proudest capital in Christendom. The errand is real. Leeches from the woman by the Puerta de Guadalajara, and Peruvian bark from a Genoese apothecary near the Puerta del Sol, because the physicians have started muttering about intermittent fevers, and the bark, Quina, from the viceroyalty on the far side of the world, is the one medicine in the palace that everyone secretly believes actually does something. Your master gives you coin from the green purse, which means palace business, and the standing instruction that goes with every errand. Eyes open, mouth shut, home before the light dies. You go out through the courtyard gates, past the Walloon guards with their frozen faces, down the hill toward the town, and the city hits you all at once, like it always does, like a wave of hot, dirty life after the palace's embalmed cold. Because here's what you have to understand about Madrid in 1698. This city should not exist. There is no great river. The Manzanares is a joke even Madrileños tell, a stream you can cross on stepping stones 8 months of the year. A poet said the city bought a splendid bridge and should now try to buy a river. There is no port, no ancient cathedral, no Roman glory. There is only this. 100-and-something years ago, a king with the family jaw pointed at a dusty Castilian market town of maybe 20,000 souls and said, "The court sits here." And the court sat, and the city detonated. 20,000 became 150,000 within living memory of old men. Houses went up overnight, literally overnight. Half of them built low and mean on purpose, because the law said the crown could billet officials in any house with a proper upper floor. So half of Madrid built houses that laid, hid their second story from the street, and they're still called Casas a la Malicia. Houses of malice. This city's architecture is a tax dodge. You've always liked that about it. The streets going down towards Saul are already lighting their evening life. Mud underfoot. Madrid's famous mud, which is not entirely mud, because 150,000 people empty their vessels out the window at night to the ritual cry of agua ve, water coming, and the sun bakes it and the carts churn it, and the wits say Madrid's filth is why its air is so dry, and the physicians, God help them, say the stench is healthful, that it thickens the thin mountain air. You keep to the high side of the lane under the eaves, stepping where the stones show. Noise from every direction. Water sellers with their clay jugs crying agua fresca. Blind men singing the news. The printed sheets pinned to their coats. Murders and miracles and the French fleet. A coin for the song of it. Mule trains coming up from the south gates loaded with charcoal and wineskins. From a doorway the clack of a printing press running late. 2 women screaming at each other across a lane with operatic stamina, a crowd forming with connoisseur expressions. A student in a torn gown playing a guitar with 2 strings missing, playing it well. Church bells, always, everywhere, the bells, marking the hour of the Angelus, and the whole street pausing, actually pausing, hats off, 100 lips moving, and then a roar switching back on like a sluice opened. And everywhere, in every third conversation, if you slow your walk and let your ears graze, the king. Is it true the German friar? Is it true the queen? Is it true a courier left for Vienna at midnight? My cousin serves in the kitchens and she says he eats nothing. Nothing. They say when he dies the French will come. They say when he dies the wheat will be worth its weight in silver. They say, they say, they say. The whole city is doing what the whole palace is doing, circling one failing body. But the city is honest about it. The city is afraid. Bread is already dear. You've watched the loaves shrink at the same price for 3 years. Watched the grain riots 2 springs ago when the crowd stood under the palace windows and shouted for the king. And the king came out on the balcony. He did. They don't remember it now, but he did, trembling. And the crowd went quiet. Because what do you shout at that face? The leech woman by the Puerta de Guadalajara knows you by now. Her cellar smells of pond and iron. She holds each jar to her lamp so you can see the animals move. Lively, she says, fresh from the pools by Alcalá. None of your half-dead Toledo trash. And you count them like coins because your master will. Her granddaughter, your age, watches you from the stairs with frank appraisal and says, when you leave, pray for the king, Señor Barber, and it isn't mockery, it's the whole city all day. Pray for the king. They hate the taxes, they starve under the bad harvests. They know nothing true about the man, and they pray for him with their whole chests, because he is theirs, their poor bewitched king, and because everyone from the leech seller to the Council of State knows that the only thing standing between Spain and a war of all Europe is that labouring heartbeat you carry under your fingers every morning. The Genoese apothecary weighs out the Peruvian bark in paper and takes the palace coin with both hands, and asks no questions with such perfect loudness that his whole shop turns to look. Outside the light is going copper. You should head back. Instead you stand a moment at the mouth of the Calle Mea and let the city pour past you, and you think about the thing you're not supposed to think. In Segovia, your grandfather kept sheep, and your grandfather, who could not write his name, knew one thing so deep it wasn't even knowledge, just the shape of his hands. You do not breed a flock back on itself. You bring the new ram from over the hill. Every shepherd in Castile knows it. Every horse breeder in Andalusia knows it. Every pigeon keeper on every roof in Madrid knows it. Cross too close, and the lambs come weak, come wrong, come dead. The most powerful family in the history of the world did the opposite on purpose for 200 years and called it statecraft. To keep the inheritance whole, to keep the blood pure, pure. You have held what pure means at 5 o'clock in the morning. It means a jaw that cannot chew. It means a tongue too big for its house. It means a man of 36 with the body of a grandfather and no child to follow him, at the head of a family that once had so many children they garrisoned Europe with them. The shepherds knew. That's the thought you can't kill, standing in the copper light with a jar of leeches under your arm. The shepherds always knew. And no one asked the shepherds, because the lambs in question wore crowns. You walk home the long way, up past the Plaza Mayor where they held the great auto da fe for the king's wedding year. You were told about it so many times you can see it. The scaffolds, the 14-hour ceremony, the king watching from the balcony because his piety was the one gift he could still give in public. And the arcades are lighting their lamps now, and the pastry stalls smell of oil and honey, and Madrid roars on, alive, 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 all around the still centre of its dying king. The palace swallows you back at dusk. The walloons let you pass. Behind you the city, ahead the corridors, the portraits, the sacred cold. You deliver the leeches and the bark. Your master takes them, counts them, nods. Sleep while you can, he says. The fever is quartern. It will come back Thursday, and Thursday we bleed him. Thursday. You bank the brazier, you lie down next to Thomas's warm, oblivious back, and you sleep the sleep of the young, deep and dreamless. You will remember it later as the last easy night, because Thursday the fever comes back exactly as promised. The family's punctuality lives on in its diseases, and it does not leave. And within the month the whispers in the corridors change from "is it true" to "how long?" And then, on a grey morning smelling of snow off the Guadarrama, your master shakes you awake in the dark, already dressed for travel, and says the sentence that will divide your life into before and after. Pack the instruments, all of them. We go with the court to the Escorial. The king wishes to visit his family. His family, every one of whom is dead. Thursday comes, as promised, and the fever with it, punctual as the Angelus. The bleeding of the king is a ceremony the way everything is a ceremony, and underneath the ceremony it is a job of work, and the job is yours and your master's. The physicians decide the that and the how much. They confer in Latin at the foot of the bed, 3 of them, gowned, while the patient shivers above their bibliography. but the lancet itself is beneath the dignity of physicians. Surgery is manual labour. Doctors of medicine do not work with their hands. So the order comes down the room's invisible ladder, from Latin to Castilian to Don Cristobal's quiet. Prepare the arm, and the arm is prepared by you. You know this arm. Thin, the muscle long ago gone soft, the skin dry and papery over the elbow. The veins, this is the problem, this is always the problem. The veins deep and sluggish and shy. You bind the linen band above the elbow firm, not cruel. You chafe the forearm between your palms to cool the blood down. Long strokes wrist to elbow, and the king watches you do it with those dark eyes. And this close you can feel the fever coming off him like the ghost of a brazier. And smell it, that sweetish half-tone your master taught you at Atocha, on bodies nobody prayed for. Cold hands, the king says, thick, slow, an observation, not a complaint. Forgive me, Majesty. You breathe on your palms, rub them, continue. He watches. There is something in the watching you have never gotten used to. The attention of a man for whom this, the chafing of an arm at 7 in the morning, is an event, because his days have so few, because everything else that happens to him is either worship or paperwork. Don Cristobal opens the vein with one short, competent motion. The king never flinches. He has been bled several hundred times in his life. His body has yielded blood to medicine the way his empire yields silver, on schedule in fixed quantities to no visible benefit. And the blood comes dark and slow into the graduated basin you hold, and you count in your head with the tick of the room's French clock, and the physicians watch the basin, and the confessor prays, and somewhere behind you the queen has come in. You know it from the room, not from looking. The room changes around Mariana of Neuburg the way water changes around a keel. The courtier's stillness acquires effort. She comes to the bedside opposite, big, handsome, formidable, 12 years of this country in her face and none of it surrendered. And she looks at her husband being drained into your basin, and her jaw, an ordinary jaw, a good German jaw, that was the entire point of her, sets in a way you have learned to read like weather. They speak. His voice labours. Hers is low and quick with its German edge. You do not understand most of it, and you make sure your face understands none of it, because you are holding a basin of royal blood between two people whose marriage is the hinge of Europe, and every ambassador in Madrid would pay a year's income for your ears. But here is what actually passes in the plain human channel underneath the politics, visible to furniture. She straightens his cap. That's all. Mid-sentence, an old reflex, she reaches and straightens the linen cap on his head, the way you'd straighten a child's, and for a second the hand rests and he leans, barely, a degree, into the touch, the untouchable king, starved his whole life for exactly this. 10 years they have waited for a child under the eyes of the entire world. 10 years of the court counting on its fingers behind fans, of ambassadors reporting her health to foreign councils like Harvest News, of announced hopes dissolving into humiliations that were also state crises. Whatever she wants. And they say she wants everything. The Austrian cause, her German kin provided for, her own future secured against the day this bed is empty. Whatever the pamphlets and the kitchen say she is, you have watched her straighten his cap when no policy required it. The basin reaches its mark. Your master closes the vein, binds the arm. You bring the warm wine and the biscuit that etiquette prescribes, and the jaw cannot manage, so it is soaked first. You soak it in the wine until it is paste, and you do it below the level of the bed where the room cannot see. because you learned in your first month that the king would rather go hungry than be watched eating like an infant. And this small, smuggled mercy is the closest thing to treason you commit. The physicians pronounce the operation a success. They always pronounce it a success. The fever will return in 72 hours. Everyone in the room knows it. The clock ticks. The empire proceeds. At the door, backing out with the covered basin, you pass close to the Queen. She looks at you, actually at you, a full half-second, which from her is an audit, and at the basin, and she says in her accented Castilian quietly, to no one, to the room, to God, "So much blood, where does he keep finding it?" Nobody answers. You take his blood away down the corridor, past the portraits, and you think, "From the Majesty." He finds it in the fourth niche, left wall. It is the family's oldest account, and he is the last name that can draw on it, and it is very nearly overdrawn. The journey to the Escorial is 7 leagues northwest, a full day for a royal train that moves at the pace of its slower ceremony. You have never made it before. Court servants of your grade don't travel, they're inventoried. But a sick king travels with his body servants, and you are, by the strange arithmetic of the etiquette, part of the luggage of the royal jaw. You leave before full light, and the train stretches out of Madrid like a black thread pulled from black cloth. Coaches, mules, guards, the wagons of the wardrobe and the chapel and the kitchen, outriders, monks. The king travels shut in a great leather-hung coach with the Queen and his confessor, and at every village the people are out along the road in the cold, kneeling in the mud as the coach passes, and they stay kneeling long after it's gone. The land climbs. Madrid's plain gives way to broken country, granite bones showing through thin soil, ilex and juniper and cold-smelling wind, and ahead of you all day, growing, the wall of the Guadarrama, real mountains, already white on top. You ride on the apothecary wagon with the instrument chest between your feet, and the driver, a veteran of 30 years of these transfers, tells you what you're about to see before you see it, the way men do with things too big to meet unwarned. You think the Alcázar is a serious building, he says. The Alcázar is a posada. Wait. And in the last light of the afternoon, the train comes around a shoulder of granite, and there it is. And he was right, and you understand immediately that you have been wrong about what buildings can be. San Lorenzo de El Escorial, the monastery palace of the kings of Spain. It sits against the mountainside like something set down by a hand the size of the sky. A rectangle of grey granite 200 paces by nearly 300, 4,000 windows, towers at the corners, a dome in the centre riding above it all, and no ornament. That's the thing that stops your breath, the refusal. No lace of stone, no boasting, nothing but proportion, and grey light and mass. Philip II built it, the king's great-grandfather, and the family arithmetic whispers, his great-great-grandfather too by another path. Built it in 21 years to fulfill a battle vow, laid it out, they say, on the pattern of a gridiron, the instrument on which San Lorenzo was martyred, fire under iron, a palace shaped like the tool of a saint's death. A king who ruled the world from a cell-sized room in its corner, whose bed was placed so that, dying, he could see the high altar of the church through an inner window and hear the Mass without moving. He died there, in agony borne with terrifying patience, 52 days of it, exactly 100 years ago this autumn. His great-grandson is coming back at the exact century mark in a curtained coach to open the family's coffins, because that is the purpose of this journey. It was never said in the Alcázar above a murmur, but out here in the wind the monks and officers speak it plainly, and it is worse said plainly. The king has ordered the opening of the entierros, the burials. The royal dead of Spain lie here, beneath the high altar, in a chamber his father finished, the Pantheon de los Reyes, a small round vault of dark marble, jasper and bronze, gilded like the inside of a reliquary, where the kings lie on one side and the queens who bore kings on the other, stacked in niches in coffins of marble and lead. The most exclusive bedroom in the world, entry requirement, a crown, and death, and the last of the line wishes to go down and look at them, at his father, at his mother, when her time in the drying chamber is done, because there is even a room for that, the pudridero, the rotting room, where royal bodies wait years in quicklime and lead until they are dry enough for marble. This family has bureaucracy for its corpses. He wishes. The phrase travels the camp in whispers, and every man crosses himself on hearing it. He wishes to see their faces. Nobody can tell him no. That's the terrible mechanism of it. He is the king. The etiquette that rules whether he may pour his own chocolate has no clause for this, because no one imagined it. The confessor is said to have wept and consented. The monks are said to be praying in shifts. The physicians are said to have advised against the night air of the crypt, which is the most physician thing you have ever heard. The King of Spain descends to interrogate death itself, and medicine's contribution is a concern about drafts. Your master's contribution is you. He tells you on the second evening, in the low vaulted room in the palace wing where the two of you are quartered, while he checks the instrument chests by candlelight. Not the razors this time, the other chest. Salts and spirits against fainting. Restoratives. Linen. The folding chair. His Majesty will go down with the prior, the confessor, 2 friars and the marquis, he says, and me, in case the body fails, and you to carry, and because my eyes at night are not what they were. He closes the chest. He looks at you for a long moment, and for the first time in 2 years, Don Cristobal de Mesa, bleeder of dukes, keeper of the palace's 10,000 silences, looks like an old man who would rather not. What you will see tomorrow night, no one has seen. What you will hear, you will not repeat while you live, not to me, not to your confessor, beyond your own sins. Do you understand? Yes, senor. No, he says without heat, you don't. But you will hold the lamp steadily anyway, because that is the trade. The hand does its work whatever the eyes are doing. That is the whole of surgery, and the whole of service, and the whole of it. He pinches out one of the 2 candles. Economy, even here, even now. Sleep. Tomorrow you rest all day. We go down after Compline. You do not sleep. You lie in the granite cold, listening to the Escorial silence, which is not like other silences. It has weight, it presses, 4,000 windows of it. And somewhere under the floor of the great church, through however many yards of stone, the family is lying in its marble drawers with its one face, waiting for its last member to come down and knock. Tomorrow night you will hold the light. There is one more teacher you meet before the crypt, and he finds you the evening before the descent on the roofs, after the friar of the Leads has gone down and you have stayed, unable to stop looking at Castile. He is one of the old Geronimite monks, ancient, past 80, moving along the parapet walk with 2 sticks and total unconcern for the drop, and he stops beside you because old men on evening walks collect the young the way hedges collect wool. Palace, he says, meaning you. The barber surgeon's assistant, father. Ah. He settles against the granite, arranges his sticks, looks out at the plain-going violet. Then you go down tomorrow night. There are no secrets in a monastery. You say nothing, which is answer enough for a man who has spent 60 years reading silences. I was a novice here, he says, when they moved the bodies into this new pantheon. The year they finished it. I was 17, your age, more or less. They brought them down from the old vault in procession, kings and queens who'd waited decades in plain coffins for their marble to be ready. And the community sang the whole night, and I carried a torch, and my arms shook so badly the wax ran on my hands, and I did not notice until morning. Burns. Here. He turns over one spotted wrist, where nothing is visible anymore except to him. So, I know something of what your arms will do tomorrow. I came to tell you it passes. The wind moves over the slates. Below and behind you, the dome holds the last light like a held breath. May I ask you something, Father? You're going to ask what everyone your age asks, he says, not unkindly. You're going to ask why God let it happen to them. The jaw, the children, all of it. And I will tell you what I tell the novices, and you will find it insufficient as they do, and in 40 years you will find you've been living on it as I do. He gathers his sticks, preparing to move on, and delivers it over his shoulder, in the tone of a man passing the salt. God did not arrange those marriages, boy. Lawyers did. God's contribution was the shepherd's rule, which he wrote plainly in every flock in Castile, in letters big enough to read from this roof. They chose not to read it because they were busy reading dispensations. Rome dispensed and dispensed. Uncle and niece, cousin and cousin, the ink always found. And heaven's rule stood there the whole time in the sheep, patient as all heaven's rules, waiting to be enforced. He is moving now, sticks clicking on the leads. It has been enforced. That is what you will see tomorrow. Not a punishment, an arithmetic. Sleep well, boy. Hold your lamp with both hands when your arms start. Nobody notices two hands. Everybody notices a shaking one. And he clicks away along the parapet into the dusk, 80 years old, entirely at peace on the roof of the largest building in the world, over the bones of its builders, both hands on the lamp. You will remember it at the exact moment you need it, 34 steps down, tomorrow at midnight, with the lead crying and the king leaning over his father's face. Old men give away their heaviest things casually. It's the only way the weight can be passed at all. The day of the descent is the longest day of your life, and almost nothing happens in it. That's what makes it long. The court fasts. The king hears 3 masses. You check the chest 4 times. Strop razors nobody will use because your hands need occupation. And in the afternoon your master sends you up onto the roofs with a friar who tends the leads. Sends you deliberately, you understand later, to fill your eyes with distance before the night fills them with the opposite. And the roofs of the Escorial are a country of their own. Acres of grey slate pitched against the sky. Granite ridges, the great dome above you like a moon you could walk to. From the parapet the world falls away. South and east, the whole plain of Castile, brown and gold and violet, running flat to the edge of sight, and somewhere in the haze, invisible, Madrid, the entire capital of the world's empire reduced to a smudge you can cover with your thumb. Behind you, the mountain wall, snow-lined, and the wind off it so clean it hurts, wind with no city in it, no tallow, no mud, no incense, no sick room. You stand there and breathe like a man drinking. The friar points out the king's window in the palace corner. The actual small window of the actual small room where Philip II lay dying 100 years ago, with his eye on the altar. From up here it is one dark square among 4,000. The man who owned half the planet needed one window at the end and used it to look at God. They were giants, the old ones, the friar says mildly into the wind, whatever else they were. He doesn't finish the thought. On this roof, over that crypt, nobody needs him to. You look out over Castile until the light goes bronze, and you fix it in your memory on purpose. The size of it, the openness. Because some animal part of you knows you will need a large, clean room in your mind to stand in later tonight. Compline ends at full dark. The monastery goes to its cells. And then, in the emptied church, that granite cavern where your footsteps come back at you from a ceiling lost in shadow, the party assembles by the light of 6 lamps. The prior, grey and straight. The confessor, grey and not. 2 friars, the marquis, representing the crown's dignity, wearing the face of a man performing calm. Don Cristobal with the chest. You with the lamps and the folding chair. And the king. They have dressed him in plain black. No fleece. No orders. Out of the state clothes he looks smaller and, strangely, younger. A bent boy with an old man's face. The jaw hangs open a little, as always by evening. His breathing is the loudest thing in the church. The entrance to the Pantheon opens off the lower choir. A door of gilded bronze, and behind it a staircase of polished marble descending into the foundation, into the living rock under the high altar, placed there so that every mass said above is said directly over the bodies of the kings. Even the geometry of this family is theology. The prior unlocks the bronze. The sound of the key is obscene in the silence. Cold comes up the stair to meet you. A particular cold, still and mineral and faintly sweet with wax and something under the wax you decide not to name yet. The king goes down leaning on the marquis's arm, 1 marble step at a time, 34 steps, and his breathing echoes ahead of him into the dark so that it sounds. You will never repeat this to a living soul, or it sounds as if something below is breathing back. The chamber at the bottom is small. That's the first shock. You had imagined a cavern. It is a jewel box, an octagon of dark Toledo marble and jasper, gold bronze fluting the walls, a gilded chandelier hanging cold. When the lamps come in, the whole room ignites softly around you. Brown-red stone, black stone, gold, gold, gold. And on either side, floor to ceiling, the niches, the sarcophagi of black marble with bronze fittings, stacked 4 high, each with its name in bronze letters. Carolus, Philippus, Philippus, Philippus. On the other side, the queens. The room holds 26 berths. The family has been filling it for a century and a half. Every person in Spain whose name is in these letters had the jaw. The friars set the lamps. The king stands in the centre, under the cold chandelier, turning slowly, mouth open, reading his own surname around the walls. And then he says, thick, slow, the voice you know, hit in the marble and coming back doubled, he says, open them. The prior looks at the confessor. The confessor looks at the floor, and the friars bring the tools, and it begins, and you hold the lamp in your hand. The trade, the trade. Your hand is perfectly steady, and the light does not shake, whatever the rest of you is doing. The masonry seals are broken with soft chisels cloth-wrapped, so that even this sounds muffled, apologetic. The marble fronts are drawn out on their hidden rails. Inside each berth the coffin, wood sheathed in lead, and inside the lead, the friars work it back with shears and bars, and lead moving sounds like nothing else on earth, a dull grinding cry. Inside the lead, them. The emperor's son is dust and dark bone and the shreds of a shroud. 130 years underground argues with even a king. The king looks a long time anyway, says nothing. His grandfather is more. His father, Philip IV, dead 33 years, sealed in lead in this dry mountain crypt after his season in the drying room. His father is a face, sunken, browned, collapsed at the eyes, the skin gone to something between leather and paper, shreds of the burial clothes, the collar, the hands crossed with a crucifix under them, but a face, unmistakably, and unmistakably that face. The long pale mandible thrusting up out of the ruin at the exact angle you steady with your palm every single morning. Death has taken everything else and left the jaw. The jaw was always the most durable thing they owned. The king leans over his father. The lamps hiss faintly. 9 living men in a gold room full of the family, and no one breathes except him, wet, labouring, in, out, in. The last working set of those lungs anywhere on earth, 6 inches above the previous set. And the King of Spain looks into his father's dead face, the face that is his face, the face on the coins, the face in the Titians, the face you hold. And he does not weep, and he does not pray aloud, and what he finally says, in that slow, thick, ruined voice into the silence of the crypt, is this: he looks like me. Not I look like him. He looks like me. As if the resemblance ran backward, as if all of them, all the way up the marble wall, all the way up the portraits, all the way back to the old emperor, had been copies in advance of this final version. As if 200 years of the proudest blood in Europe had only ever been drafts of the small bent man now leaning on a marquis's arm in the lamplight, the last edition, after which the press stops. No one answers him. There is no answer. The prior begins very quietly the De Profundis. Out of the depths I've cried unto thee. And the friars take it up, and the Latin moves around the gold room like slow water, and the king straightens and stands and looks around at all the bronze names of himself. And then he says the other thing, the thing your master warned you about without knowing what it would be. The thing you will carry, he says, and soon they will look at me. Present tense of a future certainty, flat as a ledger line, not fear. You've heard his fear. His fear sounds different. This is worse. This is a man locating himself in the inventory. 4th niche, left wall. They will grind the lead over him and chisel Carolus Secundus into the bronze. And the room will be, you count the empty berths without wanting to. The room will be far from full. Built for a dynasty, about to run out of dynasty before it runs out of shelves. They close the coffins. Lead cries again. Marble slides home. The seals are reset with fresh mortar that smells, absurdly, of ordinary building work, of any wall in Madrid. The king takes a last slow turn under the chandelier, the reader finishing the page, and then he is helped to the stair, and the party climbs, 34 steps back toward the world of the living, his breathing going up ahead of you into the dark of the church. You come up last, carrying the lamps. At the bronze door you look back once, the way you shouldn't. The little gold room is sinking back into blackness behind you. Name by name, Philippus, Carolus, gone. The prior locks the door. The key turns like the first shovel of earth. And this is how you learn the last rule of the House of Habsburg, the one no etiquette book contains. They married each other to keep everything in the family. And they succeeded. Everything is in the family now. Everything is in that room. There is one more thing that happened in the crypt and you've gone back and forth all your life about whether to keep it or give it, and you are giving it, because a story owed this much truth should be paid in full, before they close the vault after his father, after the long Latin. The king turned to the right-hand wall, the queen's side, and he stood in front of one niche low on the wall, and did not order it opened, and did not move, and the whole party stood behind him in the lamp hiss, and understood at the same moment what he was looking at, because everyone knew where she lay. Maria Louisa, the French girl who wept at the honour of him, and then was kind to him anyway, 26 forever in the marble. He put out his hand, the untouchable king, whom no one may touch, and laid it flat on the cold front of her tomb, and left it there. That's all. No words this time. The lamps hissed. The prior did not begin a prayer. Even the prior understood that some silences are the prayer. Your arms had begun to shake by then, the old monk's prophecy arriving on schedule, and you took the lamp in both hands as instructed, and the light held steady. And over its steadiness you watched the last Habsburg stand with his palm against the one door in the family vault he could not bear to have opened. The only member of the family who had ever been simply, uselessly, unpolitically his. Then he took the hand back and turned and said, "It is enough," and they brought him to the stairs. Afterward, this is the part that belongs to you alone, the part you've never told. Afterward, near dawn, unable to be indoors, you went up to the roofs again. Alone this time, which was forbidden, and you didn't care, and no one saw. The east was going grey over Castile. The cold up there was absolute and clean, and you gulped it like the diver you were, surfacing from the gold room, from the lead's cry, from the family face in its final draught. And standing at the parapet with your burned-out lamp still in your hand, you understood the whole of it at once, the way you understand things at 17 at dawn on a roof, completely and wordlessly, so that you'd spend the rest of your life finding the words. They were not monsters. That would have been easier. They were people who loved, parents who buried 12 children and wrote to nuns asking why. A broken king who laughed at his wife's jokes. An old dying man in a marble drawer whose son leaned over him and claimed the resemblance in the wrong direction out of pure loneliness. The horror was never a cruel heart anywhere in the story. The horror was a rule. Keep it in the family, followed with perfect love, perfect faith, and perfect discipline for 200 years by people who could not see the pond because they were the carp. Every wedding a triumph, every christening a hope, every portrait a warning that hung in plain sight in their own corridors, growing 1 degree heavier per generation, and they walked past it every day, the way you walk past it every day, and saw only family. The sun came up over the plain. Below you in the palace corner, the small dark window of the room where the great Philip died watching his altar. Behind you, under the dome, under the church, under the rock, the vault relocked on its finished collection. And down in the guest wing, sleeping at last with his physicians outside the door, the collection's final item still warm, still breathing that labouring breath, due at your basin and your warm cloth in 3 hours regardless, because the etiquette absorbs even apocalypse, and the King of Spain does not appear unshaven, and the trade is the trade. You went down from the roof and slept for 2 hours and got up and heated the water. The hand does its work whatever the eyes are doing. And when he settled into the chair that morning, grey, emptied, ancient at 36, and the jaw came down into your palm with its familiar, impossible weight, he opened his eyes once and found yours, and there passed between the King of Spain and a barber's boy from Segovia the only sentence that etiquette permitted, which happened that morning to be the truest one available. The warm cloth first. Yes, Majesty. And you laid it on, and his eyes closed, and for 1 hour, in the whole vast machine of that empire, nothing hurt. The court returns to Madrid at the edge of winter, and the city takes its king back with bells and kneeling crowds, and the palace closes around him, and life resumes its black-clad round. And everything is the same, and nothing is. Because now, every morning, you shave a man you have watched read his own shelf. He's quieter after the Escorial. The physicians call it melancholy and prescribe against it. Fresh partridge minced to paste, music, the laying on of more relics. The German friar has been sent away. The exorcisms are winding down the way official enthusiasms do, not renounced, just no longer mentioned, their sponsors busy elsewhere. What remains, in the small hours, is the ordinary work of a failing body, and the ordinary people who do it. The physicians with their Latin, the confessor with his patience, your master with his lancets, you with your hands and your warm cloth first. Winter grinds through. The manzanares freezes at the edges. The water sellers switch to selling charcoal. Braziers glow in every room of the Alcázar, and the corridors stay cold anyway, because the building was born a fortress and never forgot it. On the worst mornings the king's hands are too swollen for his rings, and there is an officer whose duty touches the rings, and you watch the etiquette absorb even this. The ceremonial acknowledgement that the royal fingers no longer fit the royal gold, without missing a step. The etiquette will absorb anything. It absorbed his childhood, his marriages, his exorcisms. It is the one member of the family in perfect health. You turn 17. Tomat remembers, God knows how, and steals you a fistful of almonds from the Queen's kitchen, and the two of you eat them sitting on the pallet in the dark like conspirators, and it is, you will realize much later, one of the best hours of your whole time in that building. And the strange thing, the thing you'd never have predicted that first morning 2 years ago when your hand shook so badly your master sent you out of the room, the strange thing is that the shave has become the still point of your life too. Whatever the night held, courier from Vienna, fever, the Queen's storms, the council at daggers. At first light there is the water, the orange soap, the towels folded in thirds, the jaw settling its familiar, impossible weight into your palm, the bird pulse tapping. He knows you now. Not your name. Kings are not issued the names of furniture, but your hands. If another assistant substitutes, he is restless. When it is you, the eyes close, and you have understood gradually, without anyone saying it, that you have become one of perhaps 4 people alive from whom the King of Spain expects no harm. They will write in the centuries coming that he was an idiot. You will not be there to argue, so argue now here in the dark where it's allowed. He was not. Slow, yes. Broken in body, unlettered by any standard his rank deserved, wrecked by the physicians as much as the illness, bled white on schedule, purged, plastered with dead saints. But you have watched him listen. You have watched him grasp, faster than the ambassadors wished, exactly what each visitor wanted from his death. You have heard him make a joke, once mangled, patient, waiting out his own jaw to reach the end of it, about the French and the Austrians fighting over his clothes before he was out of them. The room laughed carefully. He watched them laugh with those sudden attentive eyes, and you understood. He knows everything. He has always known everything. Knowing was never his affliction. His affliction was being the knowing mind sealed inside the family's last worst body, with all Europe pressed to the glass. In the spring, the shepherds move their flocks up the Guadarrama passes, and the wool carts come through Madrid, and the smell of raw fleece in the Calle de Toledo undoes you completely for 1 minute. Segovia, your father's shop, the lanolin on his hands. And then you buy bread and go back up the hill to the palace, because that is where your flock is. And the year turns, and turns again, and the couriers ride faster and more often, and the candles in the council chamber burn later, and one autumn, you will keep the details for yourself. Some hours belong to the people in them. One autumn the fevers come and stack themselves one on the next, and the swelling climbs, and the physician's Latin gets shorter, and the palace begins, floor by floor, to go quiet, in the particular way you've learned buildings go quiet. He is 38 years old. Near the end, they say. And this time what they say is true. Your master was in the room. Near the end, someone spoke to him of remedies still to try, and the king said, in that thick, slow voice, perfectly clearly, "Many people tell me many things." And later, quieter, "Now I am as one of them." Nodding, they say, toward the west, toward the mountains, toward the little gold room under the altar where the family lay waiting with its one face, holding his place. On the 1st of November, All Saints' Day, even his death kept the liturgical calendar. The etiquette absorbed that too. The bells of all 70 churches of Madrid begin to toll together, and this time they do not argue, and this time they do not stop. You're standing in the corridor of portraits when it starts. You didn't plan to be. Your feet took you there. The East Gallery, the long wall, Maximilian to Charles, to Philip, to Philip, to Philip. 40 faces, one face, and the bronze air shaking around them, and at the end of the wall the space where the last portrait hangs, the softened jaw, the armour he never carried. 200 years, let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry. They married, uncle to niece, cousin to cousin, the crowns folding inward, the paper folding inward, until the last fold would not hold. No poison, no witch, no demon in the chocolate. Just love of family, and fear of losing what the family held, compounded across 6 generations at interest no blood could pay. The empire he leaves is the largest on earth. Within weeks the will is read, and a French prince is king of Spain, and the emperor reaches for his lawyers and his armies, and the war everyone spent 30 years dreading arrives on schedule and lasts 13 years, and burns from Flanders to the Danube to the American seas. All of it foretold in a jaw, all of it signed in the end by a trembling hand that you steadied, without ever once being permitted to touch it, every morning at dawn. They carry him to the Escorial in November, cold, up the same road, past the same kneeling villages. He goes into the drawing room first, the family's patient bureaucracy of death, and in time into the little gold octagon, left wall, among the bronze letters. Carolus II. The room built for a dynasty closes its books with shelves to spare, and here is the detail you will think about for the rest of your life, the one your master mentions once, months later, over wine, and never again. When they prepared the body, the surgeons found what the surgeons of that age found, and recorded in their inventory of him. A heart small, they wrote, a body ruined in every province, corrupted, exhausted, and among all the Latin, no cause. They could not name what had killed him, because the thing that killed him did not live inside his body. It lived in 180 years of marriage contracts filed in Vienna and Valladolid. It lived in the portraits. The autopsy of Carlos II was performed on the wrong patient. The patient was the family tree. Let me slow down before the end and give you the last stretch the way it actually passed. Not as chronicle, but as seasons, because that is how you lived it. The winter after the Escorial is hard on the whole city. The harvests have been bad 2 years running. Bread that cost 8 maravedis is 14. The grain carts come in from Andalusia under guard now, actual guard. Pikes walking beside the mules, because a loaded cart alone on the Toledo road is a riot waiting for its occasion. In the palace, economy arrives even here. Fewer candles in the outer galleries, so that the portraits stand in deeper dark, and the family face looms out of it when your lamp passes, generation by generation, like something surfacing. You have stopped finding it frightening. That is the change in you this year. You find it, there is no other word, familiar. The way the faces of one's own household are familiar. Spring brings the storks back to the bell towers, and a Bavarian courier whose news empties the council chamber's candles till dawn. The little prince in Bavaria, the compromised child, the un-heir everyone could half agree on, the boy the king had settled his tired hopes on, is dead, 7 years old. Smallpox, they say, or worse, is whispered. And you learn what the death of a child you never met can do to a building. The Alcázar goes silent for a day in a way no ordinance ordered, and the king shuts himself with his confessor, and when he comes to the chair next morning his eyes are rimmed red, and he says nothing, and you shave a weeping man with perfect care, which can be done, and is the hardest skill your master ever taught you without ever mentioning it. Because now there is no compromise left. Now it is France or Austria nakedly, and the ambassadors circle closer, and the pamphlets in the city grow vicious, and twice that summer you carry linens past rooms where grown men of the council are shouting in the Alcázar where voices have not been raised since the etiquette froze them a century ago. The machine is grinding toward its decision. The man at the centre of it grows smaller inside his black clothes month by month, as if the will everyone is fighting over were being paid for by instalments out of his own substance. Summer is brutal. The manzanares a chain of green puddles, the city smelling like the inside of a glove. They move the court to cooler air when they can. In September the fevers return, and this time bring friends. The legs swell, shining tight. The appetite fails past even the soups and pastes. And there are mornings now when the shave is done with the king barely surfacing. The jaw slack in your hand, and you find yourself doing what your master does, reading the pulse against your palm without being asked to, counting, filing the count away in the place where you keep the things you may not say. Madrid knows. Cities always know. The churches begin the public prayers. 40 horas, the sacrament exposed, relays of kneelers around the clock, and the palace chapel fills with the smell of 40 candles burning day and night, and that smell soaks into the corridors, into the linens, into your clothes, until the whole building smells like a vigil, because the whole building is one. In October he makes his will. You know the day it is signed. All Madrid knows within hours, though the contents are the best-kept secret in Europe for exactly 3 weeks. You know something the city doesn't. What the signing cost. Your master was called to attend with restoratives. He came back grey. The king's hand, he tells you much later, over the one glass of wine at which he ever tells you anything, had to rest 3 times in the writing of his own name. Carlos. rest. Segundo, rest. The name that closes 200 years, laid down in 3 installments by a hand you have warmed between your own. And on the 1st of November in the morning the bells, you know the rest. You are standing in the corridor of portraits, the bronze air, the 40 faces, the empty space at the end of the wall. What the chronicles will not record, and you will, that the palace servants wept. Not ceremonially. Actually, kitchen girls with their aprons to their faces, the old dwarf sitting on a bench in the winter gallery with his little cap off staring at nothing, porters, laundresses, Tomas sobbing into your shoulder like the child he still half was. They had never spoken with the man. Most had never been in a room with him. They wept the way you weep for someone you have carried, because that is what this building's 1,000 invisible people had done for 38 years, floor by floor, basin by basin, tray by tray, carried him the way the women carried him on cushions when his bones were soft, all his life, all the way here. You did not weep that day. Your grief arrived later, and strangely, and privately. It arrived the following dawn at the hour of the shave, when you woke on time out of pure habit and heated the water before you remembered, and stood in the cold antechamber with a warm cloth in your hands and nowhere in the world to lay it. That was the moment. That is always the moment your master told you once at the hospital about the poor. Grief lives in the routine and pounces from it. You folded the cloth in thirds, the required way for no one, and put it down, and were 17 years old in an empire between owners, and cried like Tomas. Then you washed your face in the basin, because the etiquette of your own body demanded it, and went to find your master, because there is always work, and the trade is the trade, and the hand does its work whatever the eyes are doing. That sentence buried a king, and then it raised you the rest of the way. It will do the same for anyone. It is the only inheritance in this whole story that passed to somebody healthy. As for you, you serve through the change of dynasties, because razors are needed under Bourbons too, and the new French court laughs at the golilla and bans it, and the black century of Spanish dress ends by decree, and the old Alcázar itself will burn to the ground on a Christmas Eve within your lifetime, taking 500 paintings with it into the sky over Madrid, and a new palace will rise on the footprint, and the city will forget the way cities do, because cities are the opposite of that gold room under the altar. Cities marry out. Cities take in the new blood every day, from Segovia, from Extremadura, from Genoa and Flanders and the Indies, and that is why cities live. You marry out too. A leech seller's granddaughter, as it happens, from the cellar by the Puerta de Guadalajara, who prayed for the king and appraised you frankly from a staircase. Your children have her chin. You check in the cradle by lamplight, the way no one ever dared check a Habsburg cradle out loud. Ordinary chins, ordinary jaws, the extraordinary luck of the unimportant. But some nights, old, in your own shop with your own apprentices asleep upstairs, you flex your right hand in the dark and you can still feel it. The exact weight, the click of the joint under the skin, the bird pulse, the warm cloth first. You held the end of the greatest family in the world in the palm of your hand every morning for years, and it asked nothing of you but steadiness, and you gave it that, and no chronicle will ever record your name, and that is all right. The chronicles have the kings. You have the weight. Let it go now. Let the palace go dark, corridor by corridor, the way it did every night. The candles pinched out in the long galleries, the portraits sinking back into shadow with their one shared face, the Walloon Guard changing in the courtyard with a knock of halberds, the last doors closing in their strict and ancient order. Let Madrid go quiet below the hill, the braziers banked, the water sellers home, the blind singers done with the day's murders and miracles, the 70 bell towers standing silent against the stars, keeping tomorrow's hours to themselves. Let the mountains hold the monastery, and the monastery hold the church, and the church hold beneath its altar the small gold room where the family sleeps in its marble drawers, name upon name, finally at rest, finally past all contracts and dowries and dispensations, finally asking nothing of anyone, and let the boy in the attic sleep, the one you were, the one with the razors and the steady hands, 16 and far from Segovia, lying in the dark beside a kitchen boy who no longer calls for his mother, while the greatest empire on earth breathes wetly through its open mouth 3 floors below. Centuries will pass. The dynasties you knew will become paragraphs. The wars fought over that one failing body will compress into dates that school children resent. Scientists not yet imaginable will take the family's portraits and its parish records and count what the shepherds always knew, and give it numbers, and the numbers will say what the crypt said. They did it to themselves, out of love of what they held, and no one and everyone was to blame. The Alcázar's ashes are under a newer palace now. The Escorial still stands against its mountain, grey and enormous and unimpressed by the centuries, and the little gold room is still there, and you can walk down the 34 marble steps yourself today and read the bronze letters by electric light, and the air is still cold, and the kings are still home. But people still live in Madrid, still pour into it from the provinces with a letter and a bundle and a skill in their hands, still work all day at trades that leave their fingers smelling of their work, still climb at the end of it to small rooms under other people's roofs and lie down tired and listen to a city breathing around them and wonder what tomorrow will ask of their hands. Some things don't change. The need of every body, royal or nobody, blessed or bewitched, for 1 hour that doesn't hurt, that doesn't change. The need for rest at the end of a long day, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Miguel de Robles in his attic over the apothecary's stores 2 years into the strangest service in Europe. His master's rule folded into his bones. The hand does its work whatever the eyes are doing. Your work is done. Your eyes can close. Let the world fade. Let the bells wait until morning. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've held enough for 1 day. Set it down. You've earned this rest. Take it and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.